Well, hello. I want to welcome you to Developing America's Next Generation of Leaders. This is an introduction to the White House Fellows Program. Thank you for joining us. My name is Margarita Colmenares, and in 1991, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was selected as the White House Fellow. And even though my background was in engineering and technical, I ended up serving my year at the U.S. Department of Education. After the fellowship, I went to go work in the private sector, public sector, and the nonprofit sector. But today, I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the White House Fellows Foundation and Association, which is your host today. We want to thank everyone who has joined us today. Several hundred people from across the country have tuned in to find out more about this program, which is considered by many to be the nation's premier nonpartisan leadership and service opportunity. As a matter of fact, more than 800 White House Fellows have served over 10 presidential administrations over the past 55 years. And what this means is that Democrats and independents serve under Republican administrations, as well and vice versa. Republicans and independents serve under Democrats, and it has been this way since the inception of the program. When the program was first started, I would like all of you to know that one of the primary reasons was to foster and strengthen future leaders for the betterment of our communities and our nation. And our purpose today is to encourage all of you, and maybe even someone that you know but wasn't able to join us today, emerging leaders. We want you to consider joining us and applying for the White House Fellowship Program. We welcome people from all walks of life, from all parts of the country. I am so pleased that today we have participants from San Francisco, from Las Cruces, New Mexico, from Boise, Idaho, from Independence, Kentucky, and of course the East Coast, Atlanta, Georgia, as well as New York and Washington, D.C., and other points in between. So thank you, all of you, for being here. We want you to learn about the program, to consider applying to this very unique and incomparable opportunity. I am so pleased today to be joined by this wonderful group of people. They are other alumni from classes, not just from the 1990s like myself, but also from earlier, more recent classes, including Ryan, who's from the most recent class, as well as Elizabeth Pinkerton, who is the director of the Commission on White House Fellowships. And I'm now going to turn it over to my co-host, Janet Abrams. She's also from the class in 1990s, but Janet is also a former president of the White House Fellows Alumni Association. So I'm kicking it now from the West Coast, because I'm in Sacramento, over to you, Janet, in DC.
Thank you, I'm catching it. Thank you, Margarita, and hello to everyone. We really appreciate your interest in the White House Fellows Program. I'm Janet Abrams. I was a White House Fellow just a couple years after Margarita, and I was assigned to the White House Office of Communications in the first term of the Clinton administration. We're really delighted that you've joined us from all over the country, and we particularly appreciate those who filled out the survey that we sent out, and that link is still live, and we'd like to hear from you because it helps us get to know who's interested out there and how we should focus our communications efforts. We hope this evening will be of value to you, no matter where you are in your thinking about the White House Fellowship. This may be new to you, and we hope we will spark the interest further, and you'll consider the opportunity for this year or a future year. Some of you may be very familiar with the program and are ready to go to apply, and we want to get you on a sound footing as you prepare to fill out the written application that goes live in early November, in just a couple of weeks. Our agenda. This is our agenda tonight. I'm going to offer some basics about the program. Then we're going to hear from Elizabeth Pinkerton, and who is the day-to-day director of the program and the director of the operations of the President's Commission on White House Fellowships that chooses fellows. It's such a delight for us to have Elizabeth with us. This is a very busy time. The class of 2021 just began their fellowship year in September. Then we're going to have 3 of the more recent fellows, more recent than Margarita and myself, join us to share some reflections on their experience during the fellowship year, and perhaps even share a few tips about their experience and maybe lessons learned when they were candidates for the fellowship. Then I'll say a few words about the alumni experience, and then Margarita, I'll throw the torch or the football back across the country to Margarita, and she's going to highlight candidate resources that we have available for you online through the White House Fellows Foundation and Association. Finally, we'd like to take your questions, and thanks to those of you who've already submitted a few questions through the survey. They're great, really great questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A tab, under that tab on your toolbar. So we are going to talk fellowship history. Lyndon Johnson, LBJ, established the White House Fellowship in October of 1964. And so really that was 56 years ago this month. And the first class of fellows was the class of 1965-66. One note as we get going, you'll hear us talk about a class using 2 years, but that's simply our tradition. The fellowship program is for 1 year, and it runs on an academic cycle, if you will, starting in September and wrapping up in August. Lyndon Johnson was eager to give citizen leaders, up-and-coming leaders, firsthand and high-level experience in the workings of government. And he believed, and this third bullet is our comments from his remarks at the announcement of the new program, that a genuinely free society cannot be a spectator society, and freedom in its deepest sense requires participation. I should say that this was a new idea at the time, to bring folks who were neither existing civil servants, military officers, or part of an incoming president's political circle, to bring individuals into the highest levels of government for an experience. This was many years ago and predated the flowering of fellowships and internships that many of you might be familiar with. It was innovative in its day, and it remains one of a kind. John Gardner, who in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, was the president of the Carnegie Corporation in New York. He had been a proponent of this idea of finding able and highly motivated young men and women across the nation for a period of service within the government. Criteria here: intelligence, character, special talents. I keep wondering, I wonder what my special talents are, and general promise. And I think all the people that you'll hear from tonight, in my opinion, have all of those things. And Gardner really had high expectations for this program, and he was involved with it from its inception all the way till his death in 2002. He said the standards would be so high for this opportunity that this would be as impressive an honor as a young person could win. So if we move on to some basics. The fellows, these are individuals with records of achievement early in career, that they've demonstrated leadership skills and potential for growth, importantly, a commitment to public service demonstrated, and also skills to succeed at the highest levels of government. they want to make sure, the commissioners want to make sure that candidates are folks who would do well in the work assignments that they're given. Just a moment on eligibility. You have to be a US citizen. You have to have completed your undergraduate education by the time of application. And we noticed a number of you who are in the Zoom room with us tonight are at educational institutions, and this one is important. Then finally, federal government employees aren't eligible unless they are career military. The President's Commission on White House Fellowships, as I mentioned, oversees the program. And what's the makeup of a class? Between 11 and 19 fellows of varied backgrounds and professions. What do fellows do during the year? They carry out assignments in the White House and cabinet departments or agencies, and they participate in a really rich class education program. Is it political? I'd like to stress, and I know my fellow fellows who will speak to you tonight after me will stress, the fellowship is nonpartisan, and it's remarkable, as Margarita said, that White House fellows have served all 10 presidents over the past 55 years. And an important question, are fellows paid? The answer is yes. We also got a couple questions in through the survey about moving expenses, housing expenses, and unfortunately, the answer is no, those aren't covered. If you're a military officer, that's another story, and perhaps Rod could speak to that. But for civilians, no. I'd now like to introduce Elizabeth Pinkerton, and I would just like to say that she has done a remarkable job at adapting the White House Fellows program, the entire selection process, the work assignments, and the educational programming to this challenging period during the pandemic. And our hats are off to you, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Janet. Thanks, I really appreciate that. We could not do what we do without an incredible staff team and the support of the commission and the alumni community. It's been tremendous, particularly this year with all the challenges we've all had to deal with.
Yeah.
But the fellowship is strong, and we are persevering even in times of pandemic. So you've heard a little bit about what the fellowship, what the foundations of the fellowship are. I'll talk a little bit about what the year looks like. Our applications, as Janet mentioned earlier, open on November the 2nd. It's a written application. There are essay questions. I think Margarita will talk a little bit more about some tips for those of you who are thinking about applying. I would encourage you to reach out to alumni. They're always happy to talk about their experiences and share tips with you. So encourage you to do that. The application period will remain open until January 6th of 2021. And give yourself some time for the application. It takes some time. I think on average, it takes about 24 hours to fill it out. I will say that everyone who I've spoken to, whether they have ultimately been selected or not, has found it to be a really rewarding, reflective time to think about what it is that you want to achieve and what your goals are. So encourage you to take a look at that. In February and March, we'll narrow down the pool and select regional finalists. In a non-pandemic year, we would host regional interviews around the country and invite leaders from the community to interview the candidates over a day and a half of meetings, dinner. And in COVID years, this past year, we went all virtual. So we were able to conduct the interviews virtually, several around the country, and that happened in April. And then our selection weekend is probably the most intense of the interview experiences. The candidates are typically brought to Washington for 3 days intense interviews, meals together. It's a great experience, but it's challenging at the same time. And this year we did this virtually as well. So whatever may be ahead in the spring or fall, we will adapt going into the summer. So the schedule has stayed on track. The fellowship year began in September of this year. And fellows will spend about 70% of their time in their placements working with leaders in cabinet departments and agencies within the White House itself. And then the other 30%, roughly 30% of the time is spent on the education program, which our office coordinates. And that is a great opportunity. We travel when we're able to. We've actually been able to get into quick domestic trips this year already for the class, and hopefully we'll be able to do more in the future. But we get creative and do meetings by Zoom. We've had great speakers from industry, from the nonprofit sector, from the administration, senior cabinet leaders. David Rubenstein's great, comes back every year, as does Colin Powell. So we have great alumni who come back to offer time with fellows. We have great off-the-record discussions to talk about leadership and service and the challenges that these leaders have experienced, and the successes, but also the failures, and how those lessons have been instructive to them and how they've grown. It's really a really remarkable time. Hopefully we'll have more policy trips, sometimes internationally. We are able to travel when conditions allow, and yeah, it's a great experience. Fellows have different roles. It depends on the individual. It depends on where they're placed. We've had fellows who have served as an acting chief of staff. A fellow might get their own project that they're assigned to work throughout the year and have that as their main focus. Sometimes they'll work on multiple tasks. I will say the physician doesn't always go to HHS. It's not uncommon that you would end up someplace outside of your area of expertise. I think Sanjay is a great example of that. He didn't end up at HHS, but ended up in the First Lady's office. And so it just is it's all about wanting to give back, wanting to learn. I think it's for fellows to absorb lessons throughout the year. It's not so much about coming to Washington and making policy or advocating for whatever your issue might be, but just to learn how the process works. Slide right now mentions some of the speakers that we've had just last year. You can see from a variety of different fields. Some of these were virtual, some were in person, but really great opportunity for the fellows to get to ask questions from their perspective, to learn from these leaders. And several of these folks are alums who come back. Representative Sharice Davis from Kansas, Colin Powell mentioned earlier. Just a great time. And it's really a lot about looking at things from the other person's perspective. It's a nonpartisan program, as has been discussed, and it's really about trying to look at things from the other person's perspective and try to find ways to work together to do good things for the country. So there's a little picture of our current class. They were out on the South Lawn. Masks were removed for the photo. I will share that with you. But they were out on the lawn for a Marine One departure recently. So that is the 55th class of White House Fellows. And we are excited that you all are interested in perhaps joining, if not this year, maybe next year. So with that, Janet, I will turn it back over to you. I know you have a few fellows ready to share some of their experiences.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for all you're doing. Really is incredible. And over several years now, too. Thank you. I would like to call up to the stage, even though they are already appearing on the screen, my fellow fellows, Rod Lewis, Crystal Moore, and Ryan. I wrote down how to pronounce your name. Oh no, tell me, I just forgot it.
Ariinen.
Terriinen. I practiced it last night. It went out of my head. It's Finnish and it's a great name. And you have a couple of fans in the audience, I believe, asking questions. So that's a great tribute to you and the outreach you've done. I would just like to say to the whole audience that one of the joys of being a White House Fellow is being able to meet each year a new crop of fantastic folks who have not just great promise, but are realizing it and have many special talents. And it's a joy in life to be able to make new friends. And these three folks, in addition to Elizabeth and Margarita, I'm proud to call friends. So let me ask first, here's a great slide of a few images. Ryan, could you tell us with whom you're standing? You are muted.
Yes. So in my picture, I am standing with Frank Brogan, who was my principal when I was a fellow and continues to be my boss because I stayed at the Department of Education. And he is the Assistant Secretary of Education for elementary and secondary education.
Wow, that's a challenging area now. And that's your class, yes, in the bottom left.
Yes, in the bottom left, that's the 2019-2020 class outside of the Capitol building, obviously, after we spent a day on the Hill meeting with various people.
Terrific, terrific. And then I would like to ask Rod, who is that curly-haired man with you?
Right. So thanks, Janet. So that's Bo, who's hanging out with me. And my previous assignment was in the Office of the First Lady as a fellow. And I used to get a visitor by my desk every so often as he was roaming around the campus. And, you know, so Bo would come to my desk and say hi. And this is a picture where I'm just walking out along the lawn heading home, I think, one evening, and saw Bo and just said hi to him.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And Crystal, could you tell us about the lovely ladies with you on the right?
Thank you, Janet. So good evening, everyone. I'm Crystal Moore, a 2017-2018 fellow. In the center, bottom center, that is my class with President Trump. This is the 2017-2018 class that we took towards the end of our fellowship. And on the right, I had the opportunity to meet one of the first African-American female White House fellows. She's in the pink hat, and had the opportunity to go to an event with them. They are also my sorority sisters, so it was a very meaningful, important occasion and opportunity for me.
That's wonderful. Thank you. To all three of you, would you please tell our audience where you were just before the fellowship? And I believe two of you have said where you were assigned. Maybe Crystal, then you could add where you were assigned. Go ahead, why don't you start, Crystal?
Sure. So my placement year, I was in the Domestic Policy Council, where I worked on the President's Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities, HBCUs. I also spent some time in the Department of Agriculture. And so this work was incredibly meaningful to me as a third generation HBCU graduate. It gave me the opportunity to work on issues that I felt very passionate about and issues that drove me to apply in the first place. And prior to the fellowship, I was working in education ed tech at a startup in Boston.
Oh, interesting.
And Crystal is joining us from Tennessee, right?
No, Mississippi.
Great state.
Right. Yes, thank you.
Right. See,
we're in Mississippi.
Yeah, no, Mississippi. And Rod, you just mentioned you were with the Office of the First Lady.
Right.
And Ryan, Rod, tell us where you were right before the fellowship.
Okay, so before the fellowship, I'm active duty Air Force, and I had just finished up my first command tour as a squadron commander, and that was at Joint Base Lewis McChord out in Seattle. And from there, I came to DC, and as you said, Janet, working in the Office of the First Lady was my placement. And then to your original question in terms of, you know, military members, it's considered a PCS, so a permanent change of station.
Yes.
So all of the household good moves and all of that was included, at least for the military members on the Air Force side.
That's great. Thank you. And Ryan, you were in education before the fellowship. Please tell us.
Yes, prior to the fellowship, I had spent my entire career in public education. I was a Teach for America Corps member. I served in Hawaii before moving to DC, where I was a teacher, a principal, and then worked in the district office before becoming a White House Fellow, placed in the Department of Education, of course.
Wow, that's exciting. Important work. I'd now like to ask my fellow fellows, the great trio, to share with the audience something you learned or did as a White House Fellow that you believe you couldn't have done in any other setting. Do you want to start, Rod?
Absolutely. So as I said, I was placed in the Office of the First Lady. And at that time, the First Lady was working on two initiatives. One was Let's Move, which was helping with childhood obesity. And then the other one was Joining Forces, which was supporting military members and their families. I was assigned to the Joining Forces initiative as one of the two leads. And what I learned was how to move a national initiative. So that's working with you know, government, so public, private, at the highest levels, engaged at the CEO level, from some of our Fortune 500 companies, and also with nonprofits. And these are our big nonprofits that help move national initiatives. So I would not have been able to learn how public, private, and nonprofit work together to move an initiative without the White House Fellowship.
That's exciting. It's really great. Crystal.
So as I shared, my placement was in the Domestic Policy Council and at the Department of Agriculture. And my work was focused on building support for the administration's goals and initiative with HBCUs. And so one of my greatest lessons was just how important stakeholder engagement is to the work that we're doing in the federal government. In the federal government, everything is complex. It requires a lot of change and buy-in across stakeholders, both internally to the agencies, but also externally. And so this was a new skill for me, given that I was coming from the private sector and I was used to just responding very quickly to whatever the market was dictating at the time. So I think I walked away from my fellowship experience just better equipped, more well-rounded, a better consensus builder, advocate for HBCUs, and the ability to influence and think through all the different layers of stakeholders that you need to involve in solving problems.
Wow, thank you. And Ryan, something you learned or did that you couldn't have done in any other setting?
Well, something that's very applicable to right now was when COVID-19 hit our country. I was one of the people who was put in charge of mastering the response to COVID from the Department of Education, including the dissemination of $30 billion to the 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, that was allocated through the CARES Act. So as you can imagine, that was quite a responsibility that I was very honored to be part of and given to me by the Secretary.
That's terrific. That's great. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And our last question, which I bet some members of our audience are particularly interested in, and that is how can you be successful? How can you maximize your chances for being successful through the selection process? And your thoughts, anything you'd share in general that would help folks who are diving into this process. Crystal, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think the people who stand out the most in the application and interview process are those who are honest, they're genuine, and they're very self-aware, but more so humble. I think it's important before applying to the fellowship that you think long and hard around why you want to do the fellowship, and more so what's the right timing for you. I do believe there's a certain level of executive presence that requires fellows to be, or allows them to be successful in their roles. And so as you think about the timing, I would really evaluate and think through, do I have those skills and do I feel comfortable stepping into a role where I have to influence people who are more senior than me and I'm coming from kind of outside of their bubble. The other thoughts is that the commissioners are looking for people who are authentic and people who have a range of backgrounds as they put together the class. And so they want to know that you are who you are and not the version of who you want them to know. And I think as the process goes along and you go through interviews and you start meeting other applicants, it's hard, or sometimes it's easy to lose that perspective of who you are. And so one of the things that I just walked away during the experience is just feeling more comfortable standing firm in who my identity is and what I attributed or could bring to the class. And so I would encourage you to really spend some time thinking about who are you and your most authentic self. And then the last suggestion is that the process is intense. It is not just the written application process, but it's a series of interviews, panels, exercises. And so it is a highly reflective process. It is important to give others the opportunity to read your essays, to listen to your stories, your star stories, and ensure that you're telling a well-rounded story and ensuring that all the themes that you want to get across during the application process, you've thought that through for interviews and the written application. I hope I haven't scared you off. I think whether or not you're selected to be a fellow, you will walk away with just more understanding of who you are, more depth, and the ability to tell your story better.
That's great. That's great. Ryan.
Crystal really hit it out of the park with her suggestions. But one thing that I'll add is that
Elizabeth's smiling too. And Elizabeth has a little bit to do with the selection process. So please go ahead.
Right. Something I would add to the great points that Crystal made was the White House Fellowship really is looking for people who are committed to public service, both in their past and in their future. So being really dedicated to better serving this nation is very important. I will just shout, as an example, I'm going to give a shout out to one of my classmates who, in addition to being a really accomplished military officer, had a PhD, had done volunteer work in Africa, including founding his own orphanage. I mean, you would be amazed by some of the stories that you hear from White House Fellows. So they're really looking for someone who's very well-rounded in both of those ways.
Thank you. Thank you. And Rod.
Also, between Ryan and Crystal's comments, they both hit it out the park as well. So it is about service. And I found the application process to be very introspective. It forced me as a military officer to think about all the things that I had done in the past to serve my nation in uniform, but to really think about how I wanted to continue serving in uniform and, to be quite honest, out of uniform, because Ryan mentioned, doing nonprofits, and I had started down that road as well, trying to just serve in that capacity. But one interesting thing, I applied in 2008, and I made it to regionals. I didn't make it to nationals, and I found the process in 2008 of just that reflective, cathartic process for me very, very rewarding, because I was able to find my true north. And then I went to command, as I said before, as a flying squadron commander. And then I applied again in 2011 for that class, and was fortunate enough to be selected, and just humbled to be selected in that capacity. Didn't think I was going to apply again. So that's really my first advice. If you want to be a White House Fellow, the first step you have to do is apply. And like my two fellow fellows have said, it's a process. It's a process that's very reflective, and it's about service. And for me to be able to apply and be selected, it really codified, the things I've done in the past, and it helped me chart my future a little bit better as well in terms of how I wanted to serve. And, and as they mentioned, you just meet great people along the way. And if your heart's in the right spot, if it's about serving others, and if it's about being a great teammate, I think this is a wonderful program for you. And again, you can't get selected if you don't apply.
Right. Thank you. Well, this has been terrific. And Elizabeth, I'll just ask you if there's anything you would like to add in counsel to prospective applicants. I think they've said it all, but I want to give you a last word.
Well, I think you guys all did a great job and really covered a lot of the important facts about it. But just to echo what Jenna Lewis said, if you don't apply, you're definitely not going to be selected. You know, I think most fellows will tell you they look at their backgrounds of the prior classes and say, there's no way. But there is, you know, you just have to have that willingness to take a chance and invest some time in it, and it's worth it.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you all for getting us together. This has been great.
Thank you. And thanks to Ryan, Rod, and Crystal. Y'all are some of the newer members of the White House Fellows alumni community, and each of you has taken on a leadership role in that community, in our community, and it's just wonderful to see you do that, and I personally appreciate it, and I know that Margarita, Elizabeth, everyone involved does. I'd like to talk just a minute about life as a White House Fellow alum. And it's really life as a White House Fellow just past the 1-year mark. John Gardner had big and long-term expectations for the men and women who would go through the fellowship program. He felt that a White House Fellow should be dedicated truly to a lifetime of public service, a lifetime of service, and also a lifetime of continuing learning and of participating in a community of mutual support, of both giving and being willing to receive support from your fellow fellows. And this very full slide, it's a little cacophonous, but I tried to get on one slide some images of those three instructions. The lifetime of public service. You'll see Howard Zucker, the top left. He is the Commissioner of Health for the state of New York and has been on the front lines with Governor Cuomo from the beginning of the pandemic. You see below him Sanjay Gupta with Anthony Fauci and other physicians speaking at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus meeting about COVID and its particular impact on the Latino community. Dr. Mario Ramirez, he is an emergency room physician, and as a White House Fellow, he moved into the position at HHS as the coordinator on pandemics and emerging threats. Then you'll see John Kerry in the middle. He spoke at our annual leadership conference in 2016, and that's just to give you a sense that we do have full group meetings. This year we're doing it online, but in a typical year we would, as many as can of the fellows come back to Washington, and we meet with members of the current administration, officials, members of the Supreme Court, Congress people, business leaders, media figures, etc. Above John Kerry are 2 fellows who were enjoying themselves there at that event. The top right is another example of this emphasis on lifelong learning and being part of a community dedicated to service. That's Margaret McEwen, who is one of our outstanding White House Fellows. She's on the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. She's interviewing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I had the opportunity to be present for that. And it was in February, so not long ago, not too long before we lost Justice Ginsburg. And then below, I'm looking at all your pictures, so it's hard for me to see. I wanted to share the picture of now Congressman Donna Shalala, and she was at that time, this was 2018, and she was the president of the University of Miami. And I'm standing with my classmate, Dr. Jeff Kong, and his wife, Brenda. And President Shalala was hosting us at a regional meeting in Florida. So we do gather in different parts of the country, and we go explore different parts of the world. You'll see the gentleman in the middle right with the microphone. That is another distinguished White House fellow, Kian Pham. He was a fellow during the Reagan administration. He was sworn in by Ronald Reagan just 8 years after he touched ground in America with his family, having escaped from Vietnam. He now lives back in Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, as they call it, and he has hosted multiple groups of White House Fellow alumni and their spouses and friends on week-long tours of Vietnam. And you see yours truly in purple, my classmate Sharon Kiley and her husband Michael DeVita in royal garb at our final dinner. So I wanted to give you a sense of what's possible in the future for White House Fellows, so much. And I think that the points that were made, Ryan, particularly when you said it's important for candidates for the fellowship to be thinking about not just what they've done, but what they hope to do, and hope to be able to do more of or do more effectively because of the White House Fellowship, and how they can give back even more to their community, to the country, to the world, after they've had the opportunity to serve as a fellow. John Gardner was clear about the need for all individuals to continuously renew themselves and to bring about renewal of organizations they're a part of. And all the White House Fellow alums, including our newer alums here, are committed to this continuous renewal of the institution of the White House Fellowship. And we, as you'll see, it's a task as a leader that John Gardner made clear, is to be thinking about the future and how to continuously remake that organization. And a key way we do that in the White House Fellows Association is to focus on continuously expanding and refreshing the applicant pool for the fellowship, so that the applicant pool is reflecting America, our evolving society, as we move through the years. I'd like now to hand the torch back over to Margarita in Sacramento to talk a bit about our efforts to refresh the applicant pool.
Thank you, Janet. So I'm very pleased to share with you that we have, throughout the years, we've always had alumni that help us recruit, identify future classes. This year, even more so. Not just that, but we've engaged friends of the fellows and larger networks, the purpose being ultimately to cast a wider net. There's still too many people that we meet later in life who did not know what a White House Fellow was, didn't apply at the time, and hence, missed an opportunity in my opinion. So, the big purpose today is to, as they would say in Spanish, animar, is to animate you, is to excite you, is to enthuse you, to think about the fellowship as a possibility in your life. Next slide. It's really important for you to know that we have a lot of information that we have prepared, and it's posted at our website, whff.org. You will find a plethora of information there. And I urge you to go and check it out, read it. There's frequently asked questions. There's stories about the fellows. There's information about the type of questions that will be asked on the application, as well as a gallery of fellows, notable fellows, as well as recent notable fellows like the one shown below. So please make sure you go to whff.org. This is a relatively new page. It's something, let me put it this way, it contains information that you would have been hard pressed to find otherwise until these pages were collected. And I want to thank the team again of alumni that took the time and effort to create these very useful pages, which really are a resource for you. And I wanted to just specify this piece here, because the first step in the process is filling out the application and what we affectionately call the paper cut. Because of everyone that applies, there will be a certain number of those applications that make it past the paper cut into the regional selection groups. And part of the application consists of these very basic essay questions. But you'll note that the essay questions range in size from 200 to 500 words. One thing I want to point out, you see where it says most significant achievement, professional, and then underneath that, most significant achievement, community service. They both are equal in weight in terms of the number of words that are allocated to each of these pieces. So to Ryan's point, you know, we are looking for leaders who have demonstrated already a commitment to public service, and this is going to be an extension of that. So very important to make sure that you fill out each of these sections as fully and vigorously as you can. The other website, which will open November 2nd, actually it's already open, but the application itself will not become available to you until November 2nd, which is why it's important, if you want to get a sneak preview, to go to the previous website, the whff.org, if you want to get a heads up on what type of questions are going to be on the application and the timeline. And I think, are we at the end? One last thing, yes. So after you've read the website, after you've listened to the videos, after you've Googled, you know, what is the White House Fellowship? Because there's lots of information out there now, this day and age. If you still have questions, please send us a note at this email address, recruit@whff.org. And again, thank you for being here today. I would ask you, in the spirit of generosity, let's say that maybe you're not quite ready to apply yet, but please consider sharing this information with others, maybe someone you consider to be a mentor of yours, who you know would be ready to apply. Please let them know that we're here. We would love for them to participate in this process if it's something that they're at all interested in. Thank you again, and thank you, Janet. I'll switch it over to you now for questions and answers.
Thank you. We have a supersonic flight that takes, you know, us back and forth across the country. I'd like to invite onto the screen, if we could. There's David Moore. You're already there. Hi, David.
Hello.
Hi there. David was a White House Fellow in the 1990s, and he is the executive director of the White House Fellows Foundation Association. So glad to have you, and Bobby Dorenbos, who is the president of our organization this year. Bobby is available for questions as well. I'd like to start with some questions that were submitted via the survey. And again, a little advertisement for the survey. We'll be sending out that link again, and we'd really appreciate it if you would fill it out to tell us just a bit about yourselves and where you are in your thinking about the fellowship. The first question is, how does the program handle a change in administration? And this is a really important question. I will just say that in the year 2000, I recall organizing one of our annual leadership conferences, or the annual leadership conference that year, and we focused a good bit on transition years. And so there are many people who go through the experience. There are many opportunities for growth and you know, new learning and engagement, and then there's some hurdles through a transition. Perhaps, Elizabeth, do you want to start? And then maybe David, could you just comment on this question?
Sure. Well, you know, I think it's been talked about quite a bit. This is a nonpartisan program. And so whatever the outcome of the election may be, the program continues, and it's continued in a very strong way for 55 years now. In any year, you can see cabinet secretaries will change and move on. Life is about change. And so whether it's, if there is a transition or not, I think adaptability is always important. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So you know, I think just having a willingness to get in and work with your colleagues from whichever administration they might be is really important.
That's great. David, any comments?
I would agree completely, and I think that transition years, I was in Clinton 1 to Clinton 2 from 96 to 97, and even in a transition where you are within the same president, same party, there are still significant changes underfoot. You know, as cabinet secretaries change out and as the presidential priorities evolve for, you know, the second term. So it's a fascinating time, and I think transition years, frankly, are the most interesting of all the years. So Elizabeth, I think the class of 2020, 21 is going to have an amazing year regardless.
Regardless. They are having an amazing year regardless.
They are.
Which gets to the next question that came in through the survey. And Elizabeth, you addressed this in good part in your remarks. Has COVID-19 changed the fellowship experience? And related to that, a question came in, can you do part of the fellowship online?
Well,
so if you'd like to comment there, and then, you know, Ryan, maybe you could offer a few thoughts since you're the Corona class.
So I think telework is something that many of us have all come to know very well. And, you know, there are fellows who will be reporting to their placement. There'll be fellows that were on telework. There were fellows I know in Ryan's class who saw, you know, a shift in priorities of their work. So I'll probably let Ryan talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course, when the pandemic struck, it changed a lot of our normal operating procedures, I would say. I was on telework for a number of months before I started coming in. I now come into the office most days with the assistant secretary, but we are a rare bunch. I think there's probably about a dozen people in a building that usually has thousands, just to put it in perspective. So, and then as far as being a fellow, the other aspects of the fellowship is, I have to say that, you know, it was scary at first. A lot of us were wondering, like, how is this fellowship going to continue if we're all apart? But Elizabeth's team found amazing ways to make sure that we continue to have speakers and online events. We did a lot through Zoom or similar platforms, and got to actually talk to people that maybe we wouldn't have had to been able to otherwise, because they were very geographically far away. But by Zoom, they were right in our homes. And the other aspect I would say was that my fellowship class became very creative in having our own sort of happy hours together, off hours through technology, which we did until we were able to come back in person. So you get very creative. But one thing that Elizabeth Pinkerton always would say is the fellowship lives on. And so it certainly did.
It does live on, and your fellowship continues. Here's the next question. Thank you for those answers. I think I just wanted to flag that we're almost at 9 o'clock. So I think I'll take 3 more questions and see where we are at that point. Will people who worked on the winning presidential campaign have some advantage in the selection process? Even if the title of the program includes the term nonpartisan. And I'd ask Elizabeth that, and then I think Bobby, perhaps if you could comment, because you had the opportunity to serve via Zoom on with the President's Commission this past June.
Yeah, I would just say it's a nonpartisan program. The criteria that John Gardner set forth were not whose campaign did you work on, but were ones of leadership, service, and promise to give back. I think working on campaigns is great, but that's not what this program is about. So just do your best, and I think that's what you should do. Just do your best.
Bobby?
I would agree 100% with all of that. And I would add to that, that I think one of the greatest things about my fellowship year was the exposure to the polar opposites in the political spectrum, because our class had hard left to hard right, great conversations, but it really didn't matter if you were part of the winning team or the not winning team. We had all sorts in our class, and that's what made the class awesome.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Next question. We got a few questions in about the issue of specialization. One was, are there any particular skills being prioritized in selection? And then with the assignment, once you're a fellow, are certain fellows assigned to certain roles in the administration with the express idea that they would apply some particular skill that they bring? And then related to that, a question about who has a better shot at the fellowship, a generalist or a specialist? So Rod, any thoughts on that constellation of questions?
Well, so generalist or specialist, I can only speak from my experience as a military officer, pilot by trade. I'd flown around, I'd seen a lot of things from the Air Force on the piloting side of the house. I talked about that in obviously my application, but that wasn't all that I talked about. I had actually started a nonprofit to support children who were going through an illness, much like Make-A-Wish, but we called it Pilot for a Day. And I spent a lot of time talking about my passion in starting that and giving back in regards to, this other interest that I had. So I would say you can't, at least for me, I didn't feel like, I would have been as competitive just talking about being a military officer. I mean, there are many military officers. I think one of the things that made my application stand out was I wasn't a one-trick pony, I guess you could say. So, so I would say probably being more of a generalist, but a specialist where you need to be a specialist in. So, and then to your other point, when I came in, you interview at different, departments and agencies. And when I came in as a pilot, I wanted to work for then Secretary LaHood at Transportation, and made sense as a military officer, as an aviator, but I wound up being selected to the White House and working in the office of the First Lady, and it was the best experience that I had. So every doctor is not going to be at HHS. As a matter of fact, it's probably the last place you probably should be to expand and learn a little bit more. So hopefully that answered your question.
Broaden, yes, great. David?
Could I just amplify that a little bit? I completely agree with Rod's point about, you said, you put it as don't be a one-trick pony, and Ryan, I think you said, you need to be well-rounded. That is exactly right. Keep in mind that the people who are selected as White House Fellows are being selected to serve as a special assistant to a cabinet secretary or a senior White House official. And so what they want to be sure as you go through the interview process is, can you give sound advice to a senior leader? And I think how that translates to the written application, which is the first step in the process that you're now undertaking, is make sure that you don't present yourself one-dimensionally. You could be the greatest doctor in the world, but if you write your memorandum to the president on a healthcare policy, that doesn't show your breadth of experience. If you're a military officer, I would suggest not talking about defense policy. If you're an educator, I would say don't talk about education policy. Demonstrate as part of your application the breadth of your experience to show that you have capability across a number of disciplines and areas, so that the commission, as they're evaluating you as a candidate, will say, this is someone I would trust to put at the right hand of a senior official so that they can give good advice across a range of issues.
you. I think we should break at 9:10 because we said 9 o'clock. Let's break at 9:10. We've got 4 more minutes. And everyone, I think some of you have had your questions addressed online by a few of our panelists. And if you don't have your question addressed, you are, please do go to whff.org and you'll probably see an answer to your question. If you don't, you are welcome to use the email address recruit@whff.org. Next question is, let's see, how much, there are a few of them came in on this. How much, what does early career mean? That was, you know, in the vision for the fellowship. How much work experience is enough? How do you know when you're baked? That's my editorial, my embellishment. So, you know, let me toss it to Crystal. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so to the question around how much work experience is enough, I think if you go through the application process and the essays and you're struggling to tell meaningful stories, meaningful and rich leadership stories about your impact in the community or impact professionally, you may need more time to develop or just need more time to prepare for the fellowship. And I think I mentioned earlier on that, as David mentioned, when you become a fellow, there is a high expectation that you have the gravitas and leadership to be able to influence senior government officials. And so as you think about your journey and how much work experience you have, just one way to evaluate that is, do I feel comfortable and ready to be able to tackle that skill and being able to have that influence? And just to get some color, my class, the work experience range was somewhere between 7 years to 15 years. So it varies, and I think it's really just an honest reflection of when you feel ready and when you feel you can contribute the most to your class and to your placement.
Actually, in my own class, as I think back, one person had perhaps no actual work experience. He came straight out of graduate school. So I know that that's a possibility as well. But Elizabeth, could you comment in general? I feel like my first grade teacher, or maybe it was the 5th grade teacher, we had to write a report. And I said, how long should it be? And she said, as long as a man's pants. Anyway, that's what she said. So how much work experience generally is the commission looking for?
You know, I think Crystal said it really well. I think it depends. I think it's really an individual thing. I think that the age of the fellows, there's no age requirement. There's no age max, no minimum. So it's really kind of an individual thing. It's about that experience and being able to, you know, represent yourself well and sort of, you know, hold your own in an environment. So you're past the intern stage. But also willing to come in and do whatever it takes and to help out. You know, fellows aren't tasked with making copies, but they are willing to do whatever it takes to get the mission done and get the ball across the finish line. But there's no real age or set number. I think it's very, very much depends on the individual.
Great, thank you. Several more questions. We could go on forever, but
can I give a suggestion?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I just noticed that some people were asking about active military, and so I thought while Bobby and some of our other active military folks, Rod, are on the line, they could talk about I believe there's an internal process before active military are even allowed to apply. I didn't know if they want to mention that.
So Ryan, I'll address that at least from the Air Force side of the house, and then maybe David can follow up if I missed something, or Bobby as well. So when I applied back in 2010 or 11, at least on the Air Force policy side, it wasn't necessarily tied to our HR process, AFPC. Since then, you now have to get the approval of your service to apply. And I think that's across the board. And part of that is just to ensure that the people that are applying, that it's the right time for them. And not only that, but to ensure that the service is giving them all the support they need. For example, I said that it comes along with if you are selected, it's a permanent change of station. So obviously the service would need to know that there's a potential that you're coming to DC versus Thule, Greenland, for example. so they can plan accordingly. So that's kind of how the Air Force does it. And I think the other services are very similar, where you'd have to make sure that your service is aware that you're applying. Any other ads, Bobby or David?
You know, from my perspective, I was in the Air National Guard. I think very similar though. I had to get the permission of my supervisor to make sure that they would agree to let me go for a year and that I would be paid for a year. So regardless, I think very important that you talk to your chain of command about it to make sure that you'll be covered from a pay perspective. I would throw this back to David or Elizabeth if you have any other advice. I'm not sure how it works in other services. There may be requirements in other services that you actually compete for the opportunity to apply within your service first. I don't know.
This is David. My sense is that it's not so much a barrier to preventing you.
David, we're having a hard time hearing.
Audio.
Sorry. If that's better. Yes. I don't think it's a barrier so much as it is, as Rod stressed, they want to make sure it's the right time in your career to apply. So if you are a brand new second lieutenant just out of training, they might say you might want to wait a few years. And if you're a colonel ready to retire, they might say, you know, maybe now is the right time. So I think the services have simply tried to help steer people in the right direction and encourage them to apply when.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add,
go ahead.
Just really quickly, reservists are eligible to apply. I saw a question about reservists. If you are active duty, there is a question on the form that you state, yes, I have approval from my chain of command to apply. So that's an important factor if you're active duty, whatever your service branch is, to just get that cleared with your chain of command.
Wow, interesting. Okay, folks, this has been great. I would like to ask the final question that's coming from me, but also resonates with or fits with a number of the questions that have been posted. And that is, how do you think the fellowship experience has influenced you as a leader? And I'm going to toss it to Rod, and then to Bobby, and then to Margarita, and then I think we'll say goodnight.
How has the fellowship influenced me as a leader? So I can tell you, you know, in the military, we study leadership, and the fellowship has surrounded me with tremendous leaders to emulate, to ask questions of. Those are your mentors. Those are your people who you can lean on. I wouldn't have never had the experience to, you know, sit at a table with General Powell or Secretary Powell and have just a direct conversation about leadership. The fellowship offers you those types of opportunities, and I can name many, many more.
Thank you. Bobby?
Yeah, I would echo Rod's comments, and I would also say that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I spent a lot of time with my 15 fellows and learned a tremendous amount from them. I mean, of course, you learn an immense amount from each of the government leaders that you meet with as part of the program, and you listen to all of the advice that they give. But the time spent with fellow fellows really taught me a lot as well. You know, I don't want to be immodest, but I certainly feel like I've benefited greatly in my own leadership skills, not only from what I learned as part of the fellowship, but in the interactions with my fellow fellows as well.
That's great. Margarita, perhaps you could close the evening for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, to just answer the question real quickly, I probably have one of the best jobs because I get to talk to the alumni one-on-one sometimes, and I've learned so much, not only during the fellowship, but it really is a continuous learning experience. And I think all these tidbits help inform your own leadership style. And I just want to add, it's not like I was shy when I did this at all, the White House Fellow, but I do think that it does give you a window into other people's leadership styles. And you may see something, that you appreciate, or it may cause you to self-reflect on things that you do or you don't do, hence making you a better leader. I do believe that the program, one of its greatest opportunities is for you to really kind of parachute in from the outside into this incredible points in history and to witness firsthand some of the events that are unfolding before us. The difference being that you're not watching it on CNN, you are inside of that particular policy at some point in time. So I know there are many stories that the fellows have where they just happen to be in the right place at the right time, and they contributed in a small or big way to the development of that particular policy. In closing, again, I just want to encourage, I hope that by listening to this broadcast today, that you've been encouraged and a little bit of the mystery maybe has been clarified for you on what is a White House Fellow. But of course, we're not perfect. So if there's something that we did not answer and that you still feel is not answered on our website, please write to us at recruit@whff.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Really appreciate all the panelists and every member of the audience. Thanks for taking the time.